Can't read nothing up here, can you?
You can.
Good morning, everyone, students and teachers. I'm really excited to welcome you this morning. I'm Marianne Richter, Director of the Columbus Museum. And this morning we have a special roundtable discussion on direct action in the Chattahoochee Valley that will be moderated by Rashida Ali. In a minute, Lucy Kassir, the museum's Director of Education and Engagement, will introduce our speakers, all of whom will share their firsthand experiences as youth leaders in the local civil rights movement. I wanted to mention we have a special exhibition. If you haven't yet seen it, please come. It is related to the roundtable discussion. It is called Journey Towards Justice, the Civil Rights Movement in the Chattahoochee Valley, and it is on view in our Legacy Gallery. A 25-member advisory panel met over many months to shape and guide the exhibition's content and to share their expertise and lived experience, and we cannot thank them enough. I'd also like to thank the exhibition's sponsor, AFLAC, for their generosity in supporting the exhibition. And now Lucy Kassir will present our speakers. Thank you.
Welcome, students. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so lucky to have such an amazing group of speakers here with us to share their knowledge and their firsthand experiences, and I'm going to introduce each of them. So today's event will be moderated by Rashida Ali. Rashida Ali is a 1965 graduate of Spencer High School and attended Tuskegee University. After a 40-year radio career in New York and Georgia, she retired in her hometown of Columbus as a 10-year hiatus. And then she returned to radio and can be heard on the midday on 95.3 Smooth R&B. Ali serves her community through organizing and volunteer work with the New Georgia Project, Columbus NAACP, Working Families Party, and her most recent endeavor, Grannies on Guard. Joining us as panelists this evening are the Reverend Rudy Allen Sr, who was born and raised in Columbus. He graduated from Spencer High School in 1954 and is also a graduate of the American Baptist Theological Seminary in Nashville. He is the past president and treasurer of the Columbus Phoenix City Ministerial Alliance, a charter member and one of the founders of the Metro Columbus Urban League, a member of the Columbus Phoenix City Baptist Ministers Conference, a member of the executive board of the General Missionary Baptist Convention of Georgia, past dean of the Mount Calvary Congress of Christian Education, treasurer of Mount Calvary Baptist Association, and a life member of the NAACP. He is the former pastor of Macedonia Baptist Church and Greater Shady Grove Baptist Church, both of Columbus, Georgia. In November 1980, Reverend Allen founded Revelation Missionary Baptist Church, where he served as senior pastor until his retirement in December 2004. Reverend Allen was 24 years old when he organized and participated in the bus protests to desegregate the Columbus City buses. We are also joined today by Lillian Bunky McClung Clark. Lillian Bunky McClung Clark was born and raised in Columbus, the daughter of the late A.J. McClung, a civic leader and the first mayor pro tem of Columbus. She graduated from Spencer High School in 1959 and later graduated from George Williams College in Chicago. While living in Atlanta, she worked for the Atlanta Urban League. She also served in President Jimmy Carter's administration and now resides in Los Angeles. Clark was 20 years old when she was arrested protesting segregation on Columbus City buses. We are also joined today by Ms. Ethalynn Kirby. Ms. Kirby grew up in Columbus as the daughter of civil rights activist Minnie Wimbish. She graduated from Spencer High School in 1960 and later earned a degree from Seattle University. As a student at Columbus College in 1972, she helped organize the first citywide interracial Christian youth rally. She worked as the assistant film librarian for an advertising agency in New York before returning to Columbus and becoming involved in religious and civic activities. Kirby was 20 years old when she became involved with civil rights protests alongside her mother. Our final panelist today is Ibrahim Mumin. Mumin graduated from Spencer High School in 1965 as Charlie Porter, later attending Howard University. He has also completed leadership training at Harvard University. For several decades, he has been the president of Mumin and Associates, LLC, a community economic development firm in Washington, D.C. He is a member of Leadership Washington, was the first Muslim chair of the Interfaith National Conference for Community and Justice, and in 2013 was invited to unveil a statue of Nelson Mandela at the South African Embassy after being arrested for protesting Mandela's imprisonment in 1985. Mumin was 15 years old when he was arrested protesting the segregation of Columbus's library system. So we have some wonderful people here, and now I will turn it over to Rashida Ali to get us started with her first question.
Good morning. Thank you, Ms. Lucy. And thank you everyone for attending. Our first question I will direct to Ms. Ethalynn Kirby. Ms. Kirby, what was one of the biggest struggles or challenges that you had to face personally? Well, the burden of representation was not easy, especially when it was among the first time we've had the ecumenical service here in Columbus, and the stress that had come from the different kinds of wannabes. So that took out a lot of energy from me, but I had great support from Mayor Allen, and I had the support of Cassandra Standback, who was a student there, and great support from the St. Luke downtown, and support from First Baptist downtown and the Episcopal Church. And Mayor Allen was just tremendously a great support to me. And I was very concerned about the churches that they were sleeping, and they had not stepped up to the platform of what we should have done and should to do. So that was a planning there that was very successful, and it was held at the Municipal Auditorium, which is now South Common, and Lisa Ballard, the Leisure Inquirer. So all of the people coming together, even had help from Fort Benning. So all of the people coming together made it a very successful movement for the churches who were sleeping at that particular time. They was even sleeping when Dr. King had come here. We had Mr. Nesby of the Liberty Theater made it possible for him to come. So that was a part of my organizing and the planning and the things that had to go along. I hope I made that clear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kirby. Brother Ibrahim, welcome home.
Good to be here.
What went through your mind during your arrest? You were arrested for wanting to check out a book at the library, and just what went through your mind during your arrest?
First of all, thank you to the people here at the museum, especially Rebecca, Lucy, and Imani, and Marianne, and the whole team. And I always start, Rebecca knows this, I want to just pay homage to those people who were with me in 1963, some of whom have passed away, like Tutu. But having said that, what was important to me is that I had gone through a situation where I had begun learning about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and a wonderful instructor, Ethalynn Coleman, made us memorize portions. And so I saw a contradiction between what I was learning in the classroom and what was happening here in the city. And so I was determined to do something about that, and got involved. And when I got arrested, I can still remember today that I was interrogated by Captain Clyde Adair of the Columbus Police. And he kept saying, you shouldn't be there because we have a library for Negroes down on 4th Avenue. You can't be here. And you don't want to start any trouble. You don't want to rock the boat. And if you could imagine, if you've seen cartoons, when cartoon characters are talking to each other and they show what they're thinking above their head, I was thinking to myself, don't rock the boat. I'd like to drill holes in the boat and sink everybody in it if you don't treat me right. But I was determined to do something. And as Frederick Douglass says, danger to teach a slave how to read, because I had learned how to read, and not only read, write, and count, but to think critically, which is important to a student. I was 15 years old, but I challenged what they were doing with us. And so I wanted to just walk the talk.
Thank you, Brother Ibrahim. Reverend Allen, How long, well, first, were there arrests with the bus boycott? Did you all get arrested?
Yes.
Okay, how long did police officers wait to arrest the bus protesters? Did they immediately arrest them or did they try to talk to them first?
I wasn't arrested with the first group and the first demonstration. A representative from the police department came on the bus that I was riding and said, "You're responsible for this mess," and told the driver to put out of service on it and drive it downtown. Well, he did that. We got on the bus on the other side on 12th Street and Broad and rode back downtown, and they didn't arrest us. We were getting ready to announce that the buses were integrated. But then we learned as we walked back to our headquarters that the other students on the buses had been arrested. And I think they were arrested immediately.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, Reverend Allen. Bunky McClung.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Bunky. Describe the civil rights movement in Columbus.
Wow. Now, are you speaking now or
Yes.
in the past?
That is a question. Well, from your memory of days gone by and up to today, if you need to
Okay, this is
entwine them.
this is a big statement coming from me. Growing up here on 4th Avenue at the time, I had just mentioned that my house has been torn down now, but blacks were on one side of the street and the whites were on the other. There were people doing things in Columbus early on. My dad, someone had mentioned Mr. Kitchen. There were people even prior to that. There was segregation at the point that I finished Spencer High School. And so trying to become aware of the things that adults had been doing in Columbus it was difficult. I was a teenager. So it wasn't that important other than the fact that I couldn't understand why we had old books at school that had been parts of the other kids. But civil rights was not the word that was dealt with, but the history of people past and those who are coming now behind us. Rudy was my leader at the time that I came along at Spencer High School. I didn't realize that when I went to college that there were people really young people putting themselves out to become a part of what was happening in their own community, race-wise. Limited somewhat at the time, but we had wonderful leaders, and Rudy was definitely someone coming from Tennessee, and with the training that he had done, that helped us out.
Thank you. One more question, Bunky.
Yeah.
Did you meet any famous civil rights activists like Dr. King, Rosa Parks, or John Lewis?
Yes, I did. I happen to have been hired at the Urban League in Atlanta, which was just wonderful as an experience, trying to deal with what the law had said should be integration. But working there at the time, Pascal's was the hangout. And so you would have people at any time with Dr. King or Andy. And at the time, they weren't considered really big names, and they further became so, but they were neighbors in the neighborhood, and planning was taking place. I was able to understand some of that because of what had happened here in Columbus. Mhm.
Thank you, Bunky.
Mhm.
Ms. Kirby, what will you say is the best step in the right direction to racial equality that America has done correctly? And what would you say we could work on?
You know what? I am inclined to believe that if we leave the power of prayer out, we're going nowhere. That was one of the strong foundations for the movement. That was one of the things that Dr. King had done. Repeat that question again, though.
The question is, what would you say is the best step in the right direction to racial equality that America has done correctly?
Well, number one, the process of what we're trying to do now and the recognizing that blindness is you choose to be blind, you choose to be evil. And so that rebirth of trying to bring people to the truth and the reality of what was gone in the past and what we should be doing now. But I do think until we return to the power of prayer and to the God who brought us through, we're going to be still going backwards.
Brother Ibrahim, what was your family's reaction to your arrest?
Well, it was shock. My mother nor father knew that my brother Jake and I were going to be participating in the demonstrations and arrested. And so after they interrogated us for several hours, they said you could be released to your parents. You have to call your parents. And I'm like, oh my God. And so we had to call, and my dad came to pick us up, and my mother was very annoyed. And my paternal grandfather, we would go and visit him twice a month at my aunt's house. And so she tried to get him to kind of jack me up. And so we went by for a visit with him. And she said, you know, Charlie's been getting in trouble. He's been up at that library and got locked up with those people. You need to talk with him. And so he asked me, well, tell me why you went there. And I said, well, what they're doing is against the law. Brown versus Board of Education outlaws segregation here in Columbus, Georgia. And it's been 9 years and Columbus, Georgia is still segregated. And besides, my parents pay taxes just like white people pay taxes, and there's no lower tax because you're Black. And I said, for those reasons, I decided to do something, because it's been more than 100 years, about 150 years since this country is founded, and they keep saying they're going to do something, but they don't do anything. He looked at my mother and he said, leave the boy alone.
Reverend Allen, what was your family's reaction to your arrest?
Well, I was married with 2 children when I was arrested. I was arrested first in Nashville. I was arrested twice in Nashville. And John Lewis and I and others were in school, were at the same school. And John really encouraged me to participate in the civil rights movement, the sit-ins in Nashville. And I was getting ready to go to the freedom ride, and I decided that I was going to come home and get something started. But my wife was kind of leery about it. You know, she was kind of leery about it because she was thinking more of my safety than anything else. So Mom had written me a letter in Nashville saying, boy, you're supposed to be up there getting an education, not getting arrested. So, you know, it wasn't that good, you know, that reaction wasn't too good as far as I was concerned.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Ms. Kirby. Would you answer that question as well?
Repeat the question.
What was your family's, particularly your mother, what was her reaction to your arrest?
Well, I tell you one thing, all of them were about, if you want to use the word scared, that's about the bottom line of the whole thing. But I was more so involved in the ecumenical service in the churches at that particular time. But I happened to have been on the scene of the organizing when they were getting ready to do the bus integration. So my mama was all about that, but she was kind of glad that I was not arrested.
Oh,
it gave her a sense of freedom, because I had a stepfather who was, his father was white, and they practically owned all of Bellwood. So at that particular time, when the grandfather wanted to turn the land over to them, they was afraid of the Klansmen. So when I go to Bellwood and see all of the property that he lost because they were afraid, and I happened to live in a time where the Ku Klux Klansmen would come through that community. As a matter of fact, we as children boycotted the ice cream man because we found out he was a Ku Klux Klansman. So the principals had us to just boycott him. It was the first time I known students to boycott the ice cream man. So most of the parents were just afraid, but my mother was proud of me.
Mhm.
And she was a strong supporter. If you did something and she was right there in the church to take up some money to help you get out of it.
Yeah.
And when things got better and Dr. King had come to this city, oh, she was brave then. So they all had their problems of being afraid of the Klansmen and all of that. But deep down within, those parents was extremely proud of us and the generation that we stood for.
Thank you. Thank you. Bunky, how do you feel about the civil rights movement and how has it changed today? And what else would you like our generation or the next generation to understand?
I've been sitting here thinking we're talking to students, and it becomes for the group of us, it becomes very easy for us to mention names that they may not realize or may not identify with right away. We're comfortable saying these names and we throw them out. I'm trying to remember civil rights was something that was a part of our whole life. When I went off to college, I had some classmates down at Fisk. They were all in Tennessee. A lot of what's going on with students in Tennessee at the time. Didn't get a lot of newspaper coverage, right, Rudy?
Right.
But John and Rudy, they were getting beat up and arrested over and over and over again. So I had a friend who was telling me about that. So I wanted to identify with doing something. And I think students today are looking around. You're now at the point where you've been able to see news and read articles and see what people in the past have done. But we were your age at that time, trying to identify with what in the world was going on. We were aware of our parents with Jim Crow, didn't really know what Jim Crow was. But I think it was important to understand that it's not a passion system, it's violence. And that was something that I remember, and I can't remember who told me that, but someone did. And I kept that at college. So I came home to try to be a part. And as young people, where you are now, you're watching things, you're making up your mind about what you know, what you're reading about, history of what's gone in the past, and what you want for the future, because it's really something you will be living in. We're seeing things happening that have happened before, and it hurts. It really hurts. Laws are coming up that were part of things when my dad was coming along. So you as young kids, I'm sorry, young students, pay attention. Which is hard to do in high school. You're thinking about other things, social things. But now is the time, I was picking this up in college. So now is the time as students, and are we talking high school and younger grades?
Middle to high school.
This is
yes.
you've heard people say this is your time. So become a part of things, read up on things, make your mind up about things and get involved. Civil rights is you.
Okay, thank you, Bunky. So panel, what was the purpose of segregation, and why was it necessary? And this is a question from one of the students.
Well, I'll take a crack at that if I can.
Thank you, Brother Ibrahim.
I think, of course, I'm an African American, but I think white people wanted to preserve power, and it really started off, I think, as a
Wanted to.
Capitalism
Right.
to make money, and it was a tool used to try and keep control. Because remember now, if you look at history, when this country started, most of the people couldn't vote, and of course, African Americans couldn't vote. White women couldn't vote until 1920 after the 19th Amendment. So it was about control, keeping power, and as I think about that, it was terrible. When we flew in yesterday, and before I checked into my hotel, Rashid, I went to 11th and Broadway. I just wanted to say a prayer on the site where Slater and Miles were lynched here in Columbus in 1896. That was awful. And nobody ever was convicted for that, those two murders. And here we are, you know, it's the trauma that carried forward. People talked about in 1958 when Dr. King wanted to come to Columbus, no churches would allow him to have the place to speak. He ended up speaking at the Masonic Temple, I think it was. And so you're trying to bring all that together and understand that people can't control you. You know, you have people like Putin and other people in authoritarian governments who are trying to do that, but that's not the system of America. And part of what I saw and what I was convinced to try and do is to point out the contradictions, the hypocrisy. You know, how can you go around talking about in God we trust and you are brutalizing African Americans? I'll just say this and I'll stop. As a result of my work, I'm in and out of Washington National Airport all the time, and there's an exhibit there from the Smithsonian, and there are about 40 artifacts. And one of the things that strikes me is that there's this artist that has a painting that's with a quote from Dr. King. He said, "The tragedy in America is not the brutality of the bad people, but it's the silence of the good people." And I'm trying to figure, I'm on a mission to try, Ethalynn, to find out who are the good people, the white allies, so that we can join, because one of the weaknesses in our effort in 1963 is that all of us were Black. There were no white people involved with us in our agitation at the Bradley Library. And I think there's a great resource of people here who can do good, but we've got to get to know each other. Dr. King just say 11 o'clock on Sunday is the most segregated hour in America.
Thank you, Brother Ibrahim. Anyone else on the panel? Ms. Kirby, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, you know, freedom is it's a bloody business. And sight is a choice. People choose to be evil or to willful blindness. And it is what it is. You remember William Lynch? William Lynch was a plantation owner, and he would go around from plantation to plantations. He said, "Gentlemen," he says, "now, this is the formula. Say you use this formula, you can keep them as slaves for 300 years or he said maybe for a lifetime." And sadly to say that some of that formula is still working today. But when you've had that kind of power so long, that years of systematic brainwashing manipulation, it is hard to let that go. And that's why it's so important. As Dr. King said, we all might have come on different ships, but we're in the same boat now. So it is hard to let brainwashing just leave you. And it's going to take the power of prayer and the God who brought us through to renew some of these hard hearts and these minds that we've had, and from the laws that we've had to encounter. And even now we're worrying about voting. That should not even be a problem. So, you know, like I said, freedom is a bloody business.
Yes, ma'am.
And that's the way it is, and that's the way it's been, but things got to get better.
Thank you. Reverend Allen, I saw you itching in your seat there. Would you like to answer?
You know, from the beginning of slavery, it was about money. Money. And if you look around at America today, everything that happens is about money, about power. Money is power. I've heard so many times. And as long as that is the reasoning for keeping people down, keeping people back, keeping people marginalized, we're going to continue to have problems. Voting is about money now. Everything seems to be about money, and we got to do something about this, because it's ridiculous as to what is happening today. After all of what has happened in the past, we are still just about where we were during slavery. Maybe about an inch above that, but it's terrible.
Thank you. I was just sitting here thinking, I've heard you say power, and power is really, they're just saying that we choose not to even, let me see, I wrote it down. How did I say it? It says that you have no right to exist. So
Mhm.
this is the message that's coming now, and I'm sure young people hear it a lot now when you say civil rights and the things that are happening now. All of a sudden, there's a community, and it is a white community saying we choose not to have you exist, and we're going to start all over and make sure this happens. At least that's a feeling I'm having been coming along at the time when we were doing the things that we thought were the only things that people in the world were doing. We didn't realize that this was happening. And that history has said that this has happened before.
I said
Regina,
it's a
may
sin,
I-
and I'm
Go
Go
sorry,
ahead,
go
Doctor,
on.
go ahead.
It's sinful and evil for America to be in the shape that she's in today
Mhm.
after all that we
All
have
of
been
it.
through. It's sinful and evil of what Black people still have to suffer, what brown people still have to suffer.
Mhm.
And the thing about it now, white folks are in the minority when you put the brown people with us. And this is what is being held on to, the power to keep us back.
Question from a student. What was the turning point for you or the event that made you say, I'm going to change this or that? What was the turning point? What happened in your life? Any one of the time? Brother Ibrahim.
Yeah, I was fortunate in BTW. I lived next door to Mr. Hunter, and he had a son, James C. Hunter. I believe you
Yeah.
knew him.
Mhm.
And he was attending Payne College, and he used to bring me the Jet magazines and the Ebonies. And he showed me the back pictures from the Emmett Till murder, and we saw other civil rights workers who were killed. I was determined because a lot of the young people asked me, was I afraid? And I said, I thought about it, but I decided that this is going to stop now. It's time that we ended this, because my father had served in the World War II, and I had uncles who had served in World War II. And when I read history, Blacks had served in all of the wars, and people kept telling us to be patient. You know, some of the leaders in
Yeah.
Columbus were saying the same thing. I said, it's time up, and I'm prepared to die, you know, in order to deal with this. And so when I saw Medgar Evers, you know, who was killed, and the list goes on and on and on. And I said, if I can go, 10,000 miles away and fight for the United States, how can that happen? My brother-in-law, Dan Dolman, served in the Air Force, and he came back. He had, been to Turkey, and he couldn't get a card at the Bradley Library. He had put his life on the line, prepared to give the ultimate measure, but he couldn't get a card at the library. But a white person who had fought America, a German, could come and get a card at the library. And as my friend said, that was jacked up. And so my thing is that if we're going to stay here, this thing's got to be made right, or else it's not going to work.
Wow, thank you so much.
May I answer that?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Yes,
You-
ma'am.
When I left West Virginia State University, and I decided I wanted to go to the University of Hard Knocks and got me a PhD in streetology and churchology and folksology and usology and peopleology, all those ologies. And I come home and it's the same thing going on. The church is still sleeping. So that was the thing that had awakened me from the fact that how can we be sleeping with the God who brought us from nowhere to crawl to nowhere to go, from houses we built not to comfort that we now know. I mean, at least some of us. So that was the thing that caused me to say, no. Somebody got to tap the conscience of the churches from the pulpit to the ushers.
Thank you, Ms. Kirby. Anyone else want to answer? What was it that made you get active? What was that thing?
That happened.
Yes, ma'am.
A lot of things will happen that cause you to boil up. Mine was leaving Columbus, Georgia, and going to Chicago. Having gone through experiences in Columbus pale to what I experienced when I got to the big city of Chicago, which was a surprise. But it turned out that I was in a school that had kids from students from all over the world there. And it was an amazing experience. And the very first course they had us to take was Religions of the World. And I'm sitting in a class, and I think the only thing that there is Baptists and Methodists and Catholics. And I was exposed to the fact that there's a world out there. And right now, as you sit there as students, your world is what's happening right here in Columbus. And believe it, it's an important world. And the hurt can start right here, and also the education and reading and understanding what it feels like when you're rejected, what it feels like when someone says no to you, and to the person next to you, it's okay. So when you start having these experiences, your blood begins to boil up. And I learned these different things from different religions and from different ethnic groups, that it wasn't just me coming out of Columbus and being Black, but prejudice is one of those very dangerous kinds of things.
I
That's
lived in
happening all
Illinois.
over.
I'm sorry, Bunky.
Okay, that's okay.
I lived in Illinois also. I lived in Joliet.
Mhm.
And I discovered when I got there that it was just about the same as
Yeah.
it was in Columbus, Georgia.
Mhm.
There were places that I went to that had signs, and we can refuse service to anyone,
Yeah.
or we reserve the right to seat anyone. And when I saw this was happening there, and I thought about the fact I had one son there, and I said, I want my son to be able to reach his fullest potential, and whatever I can do to make that happen, I'm going to make it happen. And that's when my blood started to boil. When I saw that it didn't make any difference whether you were above the Mason-Dixon line or
Right.
below the Mason-Dixon line, you were still Black,
Mhm.
and you did not have the same rights
Yeah.
as the majority race in America. And I said, I'm going to do what I can do what I can to change that. And when I went to seminary, I got the chance.
You thought when you left the South that things were going to be different.
Yeah.
And this was not the case that you experienced when leaving. So that
Let me add to that experience at Seattle University. That's one of your best Catholic universities in the country. But I was majoring in theology, but I wanted to take a course in Black history. And I was denied to take that course. And when you deny people the opportunity and the right to know who they are, where they come from, the history of them, you're really killing their identity and their ability to feel good about their self-esteem. So they are right. But we got some heavy history in our schools about Black history.
Mm-hmm.
In our churches, we did get some good Black history. In our homes, we got some good Black history. I used to love to hear my mother recite those poems and sing that blues. I mean, she knew that, and all of that stuff got into me. So they are right. It was not just right in the South, but you did have some great. I had even some better experiences, though, educational, when I got to Seattle University. Definitely. So we had sit down and have wine and cheese on a class.
Oh, wow.
You don't do that everywhere. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the teachers sent us let us know that the students were interested. And this is long, so I'm going to do it in parts. The teacher said, students now really have a hard time grasping the importance of the nonviolent movement. We've discussed this philosophy, and they read MLK's writings about it, but are still questioning the concept. When looking at the bus protest photographs, more than a few of her students remarked that the young ladies should run away or hit the officer. Could one or more of you panelists please discuss why they did not resort to violence or resist arrest? First question. Why did they not resort to violence or resist arrest?
Okay, we were about the bus situation. We had what we call training sessions, and we were taught that we could not resort to violence regardless of what happened. Now, personally, I didn't accept the nonviolent way of life. As far as I was concerned, nonviolence was a means to an end. And the end was to get integration on the buses in Columbus, Georgia. And we said that we knew that we couldn't, if we fought back, that was going to be a hindrance. So rather than fight back, we resorted to King's philosophy and Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy that we would resort to nonviolence. But as far as I was concerned, nonviolence was simply a means to an end.
Yeah.
My husband used to tell me, he says, sweetheart, he says, when you have been pushed into a corner and underestimated, he said, you don't know which way you're going to come out boxing. And that was Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence. But it surely was not the philosophy of everybody who participated.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, some people did go off right here in Columbus, in the jail cell.
Yeah.
They was touched the wrong way. As a matter of fact, I talked to a young lady not too long ago, and she was one of those who just went off.
Yeah.
So you don't know which way you're going to come out boxing when you have been under a system so long that just keep on boxing you. After a while, you get tired of the hits.
Rashida, what I wanted to share is we had similar things with the library protests in 1963. As Reverend Allen mentioned, there we had workshops teaching us how we had to conduct ourselves. But the bigger issue, though, is that, first of all, I had the same emotional impulses as everybody else. I was an angry young Black man at the time. So nonviolence was a new concept I had to try and learn, but it required discipline.
Right.
And we had to look for the bigger issue. And part of what the field secretaries to NAACP said to us, what we're trying to do is to exercise our First Amendment right. You know, part of the US Constitution, people talk a lot about the Second Amendment, but the First Amendment says, you know, the country can't establish any religion, can't infringe on speech, and you have the right to peacefully assemble. And that's exactly what we're doing, peacefully assembling, subjecting ourselves to the arrest, but the arrest was not the end. The end was to change the policies and the laws. And so we were hoping to get arrested so we could get to the Court of Appeals that would strike down the Columbus, Georgia law, which was still operating under Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. But the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 had outlawed that. But despite that, it was still being practiced here in Columbus, and many people were happy to accept that. And so there's a bigger issue, changing policies. It's not just a demonstration. And the other thing is that if there's violence, you know, what happens is that that becomes the issue. The issue is not between me and the police. The issue is changing the policy of segregation here in the city.
Very good.
Did you have something, Bunky? Because I have another question for you. Bunky.
No, that's okay. Let's move on.
Okay. All right. Why was civil disobedience and nonviolence so important to the movement? And why were they youth were so able to embrace this philosophy then? And what advice would you give to our youth of today who are so ready to fight at the drop of a hat?
Well, I can start off. I think I'm very happy to see some positive things that I see in Georgia. Those of us in Washington, D.C. and other parts of the country, we were holding our breaths when the election took place, the recent elections.
Yeah.
And to see what happened in Georgia showed me that somebody's doing some work. There's some organizing, boots on the ground, doing some things. But we can't just focus on the president. We got to also focus on the local elections and also things. And we also have to drill down. You know, Booker T. Washington used to say, cast your bucket down where you are. You know, we have, Rashida, in my view, too many young people who are being killed now. You know, it's not the Ku Klux Klan killing people. In Washington, D.C., we have a large number of murders. And from what I've been seeing in the Columbus Inquirer, you have the same problem here. You know, at the mosque that I attend at Masjid Muhammad, we have an expression, part of our overarching theme, our community, our responsibility. You know, we can't say it's somebody else's job. With what's happening in many of our neighborhoods now in the country, we don't need the Ku Klux Klan. We're doing it to each other. And so what I'm suggesting to the students who are out there listening to our broadcast today, cast your bucket down where you are. Talk about what issues affect you in your schools. And those people who Ethalynn has talked about, people who in the church, the mosque, the synagogue, the temple, wherever, get involved. One of my big regrets about what's happening in America is that the faith communities sort of surrendered to the capitalists and the people who are trying to make money and to deal with power. How can you go around talking about in God we trust and then abusing people just because they're different? That's not the message that Jesus brought.
Okay, thank you. Well, there was a student that wanted to know how long you were in jail when you were arrested. Brother Ibrahim or whoever was
Yeah.
arrested.
Which
we were-
time?
Oh, which time?
Excuse me. The first time I was arrested in Columbus, I think we were in jail about 5 hours. You know, I was a juvenile. I was 15 years old, and they separated all of us. And I mentioned I was grilled by Captain Clyde Adair, and when we got arraigned by Attorney Thompson, I think he was the first
Yeah.
Black lawyer here in
Right.
Columbus.
Right.
The only thing I can remember is him telling my mother, if this boy comes back before me, he's going to jail and do some hard time. But my brother Jake and I, we were content to get involved, but we said we're going to stay on the fringes, you know. But I think again, the jail was just many things. In fact, I have a T-shirt. Some of you have seen the popular slogan. I've got to know John Lewis. It's called "Good Trouble." And so I'm encouraging people out there, the students, you know, read, study, and don't let people tell you you can't get involved and engaged in your community, including your schools. And I've seen things on television where there are people, what do you call it, burning books. That's kind of silly in 2022. First of all, as a parent and a grandparent and a great-grandparent, I know that my grandkids can go on the internet and find out anything. And I'm saying, use all these wonderful tools like the internet and social media for good and not just for bad.
Thank you.
I was in jail for a week when we marched for the Black policemen to get equal pay. And we were there a week. Now, let me tell you one thing. We had a man here by the name of Claude Austin. There were a lot of people from the grassroots who came in for some help. Claude sent us food from his restaurant. First time I've ever known I wouldn't want to leave the jail. I mean, he sent us the best of food from it. And it was the first time that had ever happened anywhere that I knew. So it was getting mighty stinking hot up in there, though, being in jail for a whole week. But let me say this to the students. Read that poem, Myself, by Edgar Guest. And at the end of it, it says, whatever happens, I want to be self-respected and conscience-free. That is an interest. My mother made me learn it at the age of 7. So get that poem wrapped into your soul and to your mind, and it's a good guiding poem, and to pass it on to your children and your children's children.
Thank you, Ms. Kirby. Did you have something, Reverend
Yeah,
Allen?
the best time I ever had in my life was in jail in Nashville. And the reason I say that was because when I was one of the first, in the first group that was arrested. And they took us down in paddy wagon. There was about 8 of us. And for about 2 hours, nobody else came to jail. And we were very concerned about that. Where are the other people? So, but finally, they started bringing them in. Boy, we had 83 people in jail. And when we first got in there, the turnkey would come by and he said, for $100 a piece, you guys could get out of here. And we would say, we're going to stay here and eat tomorrow. And so after 2 or 3 more paddy wagons came in, he came back for $50, and it went all the way down to them throwing the doors of the cells open, saying, "Get out of here. We don't want you here in the morning." But that simply says that they really didn't understand what was going on. Nobody understood why we would be willing to stay in jail, stay in jail. was not a pleasant place to be. As Sister Kirby said, it was stinking in there. It was cold. It was in the wintertime. But the thing about it, I had a good time in there just listening to him. And then we were singing. We had the jail
Yeah.
rocking.
Wow.
We were singing, and all the other inmates, don't stop, don't stop. Had a good time in there. But I want to say to the students, jail is not a bad place when you go there for something.
Mhm.
When you get in good trouble, it's not a bad place to be. It's only a bad place to be when you have done something terribly wrong. And you need to discover what's good about going to jail. And don't go there for just anything.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something also, if I might. Are we timing out? But are we timing out? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking again about the students, and I'm so glad we're thinking about them at this bottom of the program. Rudy is someone who spent a lot of time with John Lewis and was in school with John Lewis. And we don't just throw this name out for impression. This man was special. I got to know him very well in Atlanta. I mean, by the way, his wife's name was Lillian, so we shared that. But this man was special, and he was special way before people gave him a lot of attention. The attention was going to Andy and some other people out of Chicago, but not John. And John, I think, had the most lumps prior to coming with Dr. King than anyone. Am I right? See, and maybe there is a book talking about this. This is when Dr. King really recognized him and what he was doing up in Tennessee. But this man was very, very, very special. You wish that the people in Washington and sitting in the Congress felt it. And it doesn't always transport out to television. And getting into good trouble was the phrase I think that a lot of us carry in our heart because of this man, this wonderful man.
Rashida, before, I don't know how much time we have, but I had a couple of books I wanted to recommend for students to read if we have a chance.
Mhm.
All right.
Great.
Can I do that now? Yeah.
Yeah.
I just, brought a couple of things out of my library that I think I would encourage students to look at. The first book is called The Desegregation of Public Libraries in the Jim Crow South. Now, is this here in the gift shop of the museum?
I think we have a couple.
Okay, Wayne Wiegand wrote this book, and I was here about 3 years ago for a panel, and this is very important because it talks about the struggle, not just in Columbus, but throughout the South. The second book is a group called the AYPF, and it's called A Guide for the Powerless and Those Who Don't Know Their Own Power. And this could be found in the library, and I know Sylvia Bunn probably has it. And you have the main library over here on what is that? Macon Road. Okay, but it's called, again, A Guide for the Powerless and Those Who Don't Know Their Power. The third book is called The Making of a Black Scholar by Dr. Horace Porter. And Horace, Spencer graduate, went on to Ivy League, was the head of the Department of African American Studies and taught English at Stanford and then later the University of Iowa. By full disclaimer, he's also my cousin, but he's a very smart guy. And again, grew up, in the country in Hopewell, Upator Baptist Church. This book is called The Birth of the Bible. It's by a friend of mine who talked about the differences between what the prophet Jesus taught and what many of the churches who call themselves Christian teach. And this is why they supported things like slavery and segregation. This other book is a book called The Great American Documents. I'm just surprised at how many people, adults and young people, who are not familiar with the principles in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and other things. It's sort of like playing the game of life and you don't know the rules. You got to understand what the rules are. So when people start talking about, you can't give people water standing in line to vote, that's crazy. The last book, and I think Ethalynn talked about, she was there, it's called Extraordinary Courage, My Life on the Columbus College Campus by Dr. John Townsend, also a Spencer graduate. He was the first Black to attend the Columbus College. Thank you, Rashida.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Ibrahim.
Don't you just love the library?
So there are some students who probably just cannot relate to segregated times. So the question is, what was it like growing up during segregation, and how are things different than they are now? What was it like growing up during segregation?
I
Anyone?
remember an incident that happened to me when I was a kid. I lived on the corner of Fifth Street and Second Avenue, and a white family lived on the opposite corner. And they had that was a son over there named Billy Portman, and he had a sister named Gloria. We used to play together all the time.
Mhm.
And one day I was outside and I said, "Hey, Billy, come on over." He said, "Can't come over." I said, "Man, come on over." "Can't come over." I said, "Well, I'll come over there. You can't come over here." "What's the problem?" "My daddy said we can't play with y'all no more." So not only did the segregation hurt have an adverse has an adverse effect on Black people, it also has an adverse effect on white people because they can't get to know us, and we really can't get to know them. But more than that, we can't come together, or we don't come together to solve problems like we should. I thought that was a good time for Billy and I to have a discussion. Even I was, maybe about 7, 8 years old, we could have had a discussion about why we couldn't play with each other.
Let me get to the books. Dr. Brewer, Thomas Brewer, there are 25 civil rights cold cases in the state of Georgia. 2 of them are right here in Columbus, the Dr. Thomas Brewer and the Dr. Clarence Pickens. Many of us do not even know Clarence Pickens. Dr. Brewer, I heard him, my mother carried me to hear him speak one time, and the subject was, "Let me live before I die." He tried to get my mother to take me out of Harrison Avenue School and go to Johnson Elementary School. And of course, that did not happen because the mother was not going to let me do that. But later in life, I don't know, I was cleaning out my mother's prayer room, and I ran into a book from Johnson Elementary School. And then we still have the books from Harrison. It was a big difference in the books. I mean, how they saw the 3 pigs and the wolf and it's a whole new different story. So even the school books were quite different. Definitely so.
Well, I'm still just caught up with those wonderful books. I cannot express to students how important it is to hold that book in your hand rather than those instruments that they deal with. I may be old fashioned there, but it feels so good to do that. It's the words are great. They jump off the page, not off of a computer. But at any rate, when I left Columbus and Spencer High School, Spencer was still segregated. So we were all Black. We felt good together. We felt bad together. Our teachers helped us out. Some hurt us. But I went off to college and I had 2 white roommates. And one from Wisconsin, after being in school, I guess about 3 weeks, and we were writing letters, believe it or not, writing letters home. And she said, "Bunky, what are you?" And I said, really, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? She said, "Well, what are you?" And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she said, because my mother was asking what you were. And I told her I didn't know. So I wanted to find out. And so finally we got into the race. Race was not the word we used. And I told her at the time we were Black. I was Black. I'm not sure I said Black then because we weren't Black yet. I think we were still Negro.
Negroes.
Yeah. And we went through so many, I have to remember my memory is bad there. And she said, "No, you can't be. look at you. And I said, oh yeah, I live with me, I know. And she said, because and she lived in Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. She says, all the blacks there are brown and you're not brown. And so you don't, are you sure? And I said, oh yeah, I'm very sure. My mom and dad are too. And she told her mother, well, Bunky says that she's a Negro, but she doesn't look like the lady that cleans the house. And so that was amazing. That, you know, you start thinking about, there's no one in Columbus who ever thought I was anything but a Negro.
Let me add to that. Go back to William Lynch.
Yeah.
He said, divide them in color, divide them in age, divide them in all of that. That goes back to that plantation mentality. And that when Bunky said that, it brought back to my mind, read that letter from William Lynch. And that division in some cases still going on.
Yes. Well, there's a student that wanted to know who was the leader of the civil rights movement in Columbus during that time. So I know, Ibrahim, you were 15 or 16, Reverend Allen, you were in your 20s, early 20s, and Miss Kirby and Bunky. But the student wants to know who was the leader of the civil rights movement in Columbus and who started the civil rights protest in Columbus?
I don't think you had any real
Yeah.
civil rights leaders back at that time. You might have community leaders.
Yeah.
And you had people like Dr. Brewer.
Mhm.
You had people like Clarence Pickens, who was killed right there below the Liberty Theater.
Mhm.
You had Primus King.
Okay.
So those were, and then they were like community leaders. So they, you know, could probably even explain even more.
I think what happened with me in 1963, there was a rift between the Youth Council of NAACP and the adult chapter.
Yeah.
We were aggressive and we were probably considered more militant, but our leader was Cleophas Tyson, you know, who was the president of the Youth Council of NAACP. And we identified with Mary Moss, Bobby Hill, and Jim Brown, who came as field secretaries with NAACP. They were college students. And I think that's the other thing I wanted to say. If you look at all of the movements, whether you look at Montgomery, Birmingham, Selma, Albany, Columbus, all over the South, in Tennessee and other places, Mississippi, they were young people. And so many people think that the older people were the vanguard, but it was the young people. Without youth involved in the civil rights movement, we wouldn't have all the credits and the accomplishments that we made. And so, but I think back to the question, I don't know what the question is saying. There was no one leader,
Right.
you know, of the movement. And I think what troubles me now is I've heard people say, well, the movement stopped when Dr. King was killed. You know, I was a foot soldier, you know, in the civil rights movement, and I'm still involved. And I don't know if we have a chance to share today, but oftentimes I'm asked by students what I've done since I left my activism in 1963. And I have a little cheat sheet I put together at a glance that I'll share if we have time. If not, they can send it to the students.
You had inspirational leaders too, like Principal Charles Wesley Duval. Mr. Duval brought us if you were anywhere speaking in Atlanta, or Albany, or Fort Valley, he made sure that we got those inspirational speakers. And he was a free man. He said what he had to say from that platform at Spencer High School. And those of us who know that, and we had people in the community, you know, they didn't have the big names, you know, like the village, but they were still leaders. Big Mama and Papa and Little Mama and all of those.
Right. Yes, sir, Reverend Allen.
Well, that was no one leader
Okay.
in any movement that we had here in Columbus.
Well, do you know what started the protests in Columbus? What was the incident, or
I can tell you what started the bus protests.
that was the
That was
the beginning?
probably
And I
The-
would
the
say the
first-
killing of Dr. Brewer.
The killing of
Yeah.
Dr. Brewer.
That was
Yeah.
it, when he was
Absolutely.
trying to integrate the nursing
Yeah.
facilities.
But there were no demonstrations.
No, no.
Okay.
The first demonstration was the bus demonstration, you know, in modern time.
Mhm.
The demonstrations, though, Rudy, was when the majority of the professional Blacks left the city. That was an
Yeah, I guess
action.
that was.
That was an
demonstrated,
action
right.
that said something to
Yeah.
the city.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. All right then.
But the bus boycott was really the thing that got the attention, I think.
Right.
And then the
I'm
police
sure of
department
it.
was
Yeah,
next.
yeah, it
Mhm.
was.
Mhm.
And you
was a
have
big
to
one.
understand that
was a big one.
Yeah.
when you're talking about being arrested and going to jail, see, we're a little bit before these young folks here. Rudy and I are a little bit older than that, but the jail was not the jail that we have today. It was that old jail with no air conditioning, hard, yeah, this was jail.
And so that leads to the question, one of the students said, were you scared
Mhm.
when you woke up the morning that you were arrested and sent to jail? And did you know that you were risking your life for the future of African Americans?
You knew when that
Yeah.
shotgun was on you, boom.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let,
you
let
knew
me
it
just
then.
say that I'm asked that question a lot by young people. And what I say is that I thought about the fear. You would have to been stupid not to realize that Blacks who were involved in direct action all over the South were being killed. You know, whether it was Jimmy Lee Jackson in Selma or somebody in Mississippi or Medgar Evers. And you have to say, I understand that risk, but I'm willing to do it anyway. Because it's, you know, I think there's another quote that I love that by Dr. King. He said, the time is always right to do right. And that's what I believed. And I was prepared to die to doing that, because I said that, you know, we're about 150 years since the founding of this country, and it's not going to stop. And if I can risk my life in Vietnam and Korea and Europe and other places for America, you know, we're going places to try and make the world safe for democracy, but the democracy is not safe here. We love America, but America hasn't loved us.
One student wanted to know how has your experience with voting changed over time? Your experience with vote, that's a question.
Okay. I was saying earlier, I'm excited about what's going on now, and the fact that I read about places all over the country where state legislatures are trying to make it more difficult for people to vote. You know, I tell people when we talk about voting, for example, it's no accident that the Super Bowl is on Sunday, but voting is on Tuesday. You know, we've been talking about making, if you look at the John Lewis bill in the Congress and other things, it's designed to make voting easier. And what is it? What kind of mind wants to make voting more difficult? Because there's nothing wrong with the aspiration of in the Constitution and stuff. You know, one man, one vote, one woman, one vote, one person, one vote. Whether you live in South Columbus on welfare or you're a billionaire, each person gets one vote. So that's the big equalizer. But there are people who don't want people, especially Black people and brown people and poor people, to vote. And so that's the secret weapon that we have. And so we have to be very much engaged with this process. And I think what Reverend Allen was saying earlier, some of us see that we made a lot of accomplishments in the 60s and the 70s, but we're taking steps backwards. And we have to fight that. A friend of mine says the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. And so that's what we have to do. And, you know, I'm appealing to the students who are watching this Zoom today to say, 60 years from now, think about what you're doing and how that affects what's happening in your city, in your neighborhood. And we need to have dialogues and discussions about how do we do things to make sure that young people are engaged in what's going on in our neighborhoods.
And those first experiences come right there in school. You sit in the class and you vote for a president. You vote for someone in there to be your leader. You get to high school, you're doing the same thing, you are voting. So the experience of voting starts early, and that makes you understand the power of what you can do right there in your classes, whatever grade you're in right now. You make a selection, and your selection depends on how the majority of the people go along with what you're doing. The other thing I wanted to say, thinking back on just from that, thinking back on a question having to do with all the deaths that are happening within the Black community and what's going on, even with fighting airplanes, for instance. Fighting seems to be something that's come along, and the only way people make their decisions or make their idea known is to fight for it. Fighting for it, I can understand, but I think young people are looking at us. Just look at us and what's happening every day on the news, and we're giving them great ideas all the way from adults in Washington all the way down. Fighting seems to be the way to solve the problem. So that's the big gorilla in the room.
Let me add to what Bunky just said there. My mother, I was in college about to lose my mind. She sent me these quotes. She says, never lose your head, not even for a minute. Say, you need your head, your brains are in it. And you have to think about that.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Did anyone ever experience any police brutality? And if so, what was it? How was it? Anybody?
It's funny that you say that. I'm from the South, got arrested down here, but the only time I was abused was in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
In 1969, I was part of a student protest at Howard University. And we shut down the school for about a week. And then finally, the president of the university decided to end it. And they brought in the National Guards and the U.S. Marshals. And about 21 of us stayed there in Douglas Hall. And, you know, basically I was kind of billy clubbed by one of the marshals doing that demonstration. So that was the only time, not in Columbus.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, I ran a light one time and the policeman acted like I need to be quiet. Don't talk, Rashida. So brutality comes in a lot of forms, all right? When making the decision to take an action that you knew could lead to your arrest, how did you find the courage within yourself to move forward with what you were planning on doing? You knew it was going to lead to an arrest. So how did you find the courage to go
I
ahead?
think it has to be, in my view, a bigger purpose
Right.
that prevents you from doing something. It's sort of like, you know, I'm a Muslim and during Ramadan, we fast. And for those of you who don't know, fasting is just abstaining from food or drink during the daylight hours for us for a high purpose, you know, to get closer to God or you know, some other thing, a greater purpose. And I tell people, you can't fast if you don't have food. You know, if you're starving, you can't fast. Fasting is you have to give up something that you have for a higher purpose. And in my case, I was interested in risking my life. There's a risk and rewards because I had the image of Emmett Till. I had the image of Medgar Evers, and I read about what was happening in Selma, in Montgomery, and in Mississippi. And you said, you know, it has to be better for us. And somebody has to make a sacrifice. And so you put that through your head and say, I'm willing to do this to go forward. And the rest is history.
Okay. Speaking of sacrifices, we've had several young people here who really sacrificed and gave up something, you know, for the civil rights movement, like Mayor Ogletree, who got a loan from Pick and Hatchet Loan. And then when the time had come, they took the girls' loan from her. So you had many people who did some heavy sacrificing in order that we might have a better day, and who brought us from the back of the bus to the driver's seat.
Thank you, Ms. Kirby. So there was a question. I don't know why the student asked, do you have any pets? Someone
That's an
wanted to
important
know if
question.
I'm a pet lover,
Yeah.
but it's on the sheet here.
Yeah.
Do you remain in touch with any of your, anybody from the activism over the years? Do you
I
remain?
still have a contact with Cleophas Tyson.
Okay.
I still have a contact with Mayor Ogletree, who's living in Texas,
Mhm.
and Elaine Green, who is in Chicago. So, but let me add this to you. I had an opportunity to have dinner, Thanksgiving dinner at the home of Stokely Carmichael. Rap Brown was there. And Julian Barnes has been by the house, and so has Stokely. Stokely was on his way to Tuskegee. And Julian Barnes has had some of that good old flamingo barbecue.
Mm.
If anybody was back in the day could remember that. But I'm still into those memories are still with me. But to have a communication with some of the leaders and the people who sacrifice, it's still such a pleasure to have that.
Yes.
Can I share this? Oh, I don't know if it's appropriate.
We talked about that.
Okay.
Reverend Allen, were you trying to
Yeah,
say something?
I was just going to say, I actually have communication with Bernard Lafayette, who was also a student at American Baptist during the Civil Rights Movement and became a lieutenant for Dr. King.
Okay, okay. Did you guys tell anyone about your plans for direct action? And if so, what was their response? Did you tell anybody that you were planning to do this?
Yeah. I told some people I was trying to recruit people, and that's a good question because many people think we were in the majority.
And
We
it
were
was-
in the minority. In fact, it's amazing how many people talk about they were with Dr. King when he was really
Right.
criticized
Yeah.
roundly when he was alive. And I remember a hurt that I felt after the library was integrated, 30 days after our demonstration, even though they said we had nothing to do with it. There was a gentleman in my class who came and showed me his library card from the Bradley Library, but he had not participated in the demonstration. And I said, this isn't right, but there were many people who were afraid and sort of distanced themselves from us
Yeah.
because they thought we were going to be hurt or killed. But it reminds me of the story of the little red hen. Nobody wants to help, but once the harvest comes, once the bread is here, everybody wants to eat.
And somebody said, I forgot who told me, said, man, they don't even want to walk on the same side of the street with you.
Yeah.
They think something's going to happen with you, to you before this is all over.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay. Well, do you have any regrets or fears that you still hold on to when you were part of the civil rights movement?
Mm-mm.
No regrets.
No.
No regrets.
No.
It
Mm-mm.
was all good.
Mm.
Still good.
In
It's
fact, I
good to
think
know-
the thing that I wanted to say, again, I may have mentioned earlier that there's this misconception that the civil rights movement is over,
Yeah.
we're struggling to try and deal with civil rights today in 2022. And I think an
Right.
example of what we talked about with voter suppression, with other things, trying to limit people from participating in the American democracy is an example of what's here. And I'm hoping that some of the young people who are out there, and one of the reasons I enjoy speaking to young people is that when all of us on this stage were involved in civil rights direct action here in Columbus, we were not senior citizens.
Yeah.
I was 15 years old, and the panel have also told you their respective ages. And so I was 15-year-old Charlie Porter at the time. And I'm suggesting that there's a 15-year-old out there now who may pick up this baton and take it forward. And I think the other thing I'd like to say is that also some people think there's a gulf between older people and younger people. And I'm saying it's not older people versus younger people, it's older people
That's right.
and younger people
Right.
working together collaboratively, having a dialogue about the issues facing our neighborhoods and our communities and our nation. And that's going to be the help for America, because we're competing with the world now. This is a global situation now. You're not just competing with people in Columbus, you compete with people in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, London, Paris, Cape Town, Seoul, Moscow, so we have to come together. My son has a quote that I'll leave you. He says, Dad, many times we're like a football team that's losing with the best player sitting on the bench. We restricted people's ability to do things here. And we had, like in 1963, the same time we were having our demonstrations here, you had Colin Powell, who was a lieutenant out at Fort Benning. He couldn't find housing in Columbus,
Right.
Georgia. So he ended up going someplace, I think in Alabama, to get housing. And he ended up being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of State. So that was a system designed to push people down who had ability. It's jacked up.
Well, that leads me to the question from a kid that a child that said, what would you say to a young person who is nervous about getting involved with social justice issues?
I think that to me, there's nothing wrong with being nervous. One of the quotes that's in my head from 1965 when I graduated, I got a book from Rosa Childs, who was one of my favorite teachers. In fact, she gave the book to you and you gave it to me because I was a bad boy. But it was a quote by William Danforth in a book called I Dare You. He said, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the conquest of fear.
Mm.
And so there's nothing wrong with being nervous, you know, participate in your due diligence, don't do dumb things, but, you know, search your soul. And as my sister Ethalynn said, you pray. You know, as I told you when I came here yesterday, I went to the site where Slater and Miles were killed in 1896. You know, I'm invoking God. And at some point in time, if the history of Columbus is accurate, there should be a marker there. That was a stain on this city and the nation.
Yeah.
It's good to know also when you get grown and stuff that you did have a part in freedom's crowning hour. That's a good feeling when you look back over your life.
So what lessons can the youth of today learn from the history of the civil rights movement, and why is teaching this history critical?
I think you can listen right here on the stage this morning. You see someone like Ibrahim and Ethalynn being so expressive and talking about 1963, whereas we came along prior to that time and the things that we were dealing with were at a smaller part of it. And then prior to us was someone like Dr. Brewer, who was dealing with one other thing, well, two or three things he really was. This was really the giant of this community, in my opinion, with a lot of things having to do with changing the laws in the community of Columbus. And I think we probably would have been ahead of Little Rock, Arkansas, with his whole history of trying to integrate and get housing for Black nurses to live. I think this would have been the thing that broke the camel's back, but that didn't happen. He was killed before that time. But that whole period, I used to sit and listen to my daddy, who at that time came along after during the period of Dr. Brewer, and a man named Mr. Kitchen, who was executive director of the USO at the time, and Frank Chester. These were all local people who lived here in Columbus for you students. So to sit around the table and talk. Now, I was a much younger person and I'd listen to all of these things and wonder how they were so brave in doing the things that they were doing. And, but the fear was there, I know, because there were threats on my dad's life at one point, and a policeman had to live in our house. I was home visiting and the policeman slept in the living room all night long for a period. So there were things that were happening in Columbus. Don't think that these were things that just happened. They happened on the shoulders of very strong giants in this community. A lot of them didn't make it, and a lot of them experienced much more than we'll ever have in terms of Jim Crow and the history of being left behind.
Thank you, Bunky. Thank you. Well, we're about to bring this to an end. It's been great. I just want to get in here for the students that are watching. Please encourage your friends to come to the Columbus Museum before October 16th and see this civil rights movement exhibit. And these kids need to see it. There's an old saying that if you don't know where you've been, you won't know where you're going. A last question. How has your experience shaped your adulthood, and did your activism continue? We know yours did, Brother Ibrahim.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to share, and I don't know if we have the ability to show it on the screen. My wife helped me put together a collage. It says Ibrahim Mumin, 60 years of civic leadership at a glance. And because students often ask me, okay, what happened after you left Columbus in being an activist? And I showed them, I got involved in the student movement at Howard University. I have one on one of the photos, a picture with me and Coretta King and Yolanda, her daughter. I was became the president of the National Conference of Christians and Jews. Sister Ethalynn and I just met this morning, and I was the National Conference of Christians and Jews had 60 chapters. There had never been a Muslim who served as chairman before I came. There's a photo of me with Colin Powell when I got a chance to meet and talk with him, he and my wife. We have a photo with me and Muhammad Ali when I gave him a tour of Washington, D.C. I was involved with, oh, it's on the screen, thank you. Yay for Lucy in the museum. The picture with me protesting the YMCA. The Anthony Bourne YMCA in Washington was the first Black YMCA in the country. And I think yours was not too far behind here in
I think
Columbus.
the building was the
The
first
second
one
one.
for Blacks, yeah.
There's a picture with me in front of a church. I was involved with the interfaith group fighting for statehood. The mask that I'm wearing this morning says 51st state, Washington, D.C. I was arrested at Howard University in 1967. In 1969, I got a chance to work with Stokely Carmichael and work with Miriam Makeba. This shot with me at the Malcolm and Betty Shabazz Center in New York with Ilyasa, two of Malcolm's daughter, and Malak. And also in 2013, I was asked to be one of the people to remove the veil when the South African embassy installed a statue to Nelson Mandela. So I've been very active with what's going on since I left Columbus and continue to be active. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Ibrahim. Reverend Allen, can you briefly tell the students how the organizing and planning process went for the bus boycott?
Yeah,
The
I can
plan.
tell you.
I'm only taking you
It
back,
was-
what, 60 years?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was my idea about the buses, and the reason we did the buses was because when I came back with the idea of getting something started. That was my thought when I left Nashville, go to Columbus and get something started. And we discovered that that the NAACP had asked the city to integrate the buses, and they said they would take it under advisement. So I asked Reverend Ed Bryson, who was the
Host of
chapel pastor, and I think he was an officer in the NAACP, to go down to council and ask them to do that. And if they said they would take it under advisement, let them know that we would be riding the buses in a desegregated manner today. And that was basically the plan I had. But when I got here and organized the group, the students,
Put the call out.
they shared some things, and we did training sessions, and we just went. You know, we went. We had to do it twice. He wrote the first time. The second time I was arrested, and then after that we discussed with the. In fact, we knew that the city didn't even own the bus line. Roy Martin owned the buses. The theater man owned the buses, and we talked to him, and he agreed to desegregate the buses. And then we started with lunch counters. That was no problem. Then theaters, no problem. Had problems with Kirby's and Buck's Barbecue. But other than that, in Columbus, it was, you know, they were willing to do some things. Yeah. Now, it got rougher during the police, that police incident here in Columbus, but we did a little planning, but we did more executing than we did planning.
I got it. All right, and the plan for the library, Brother Ibrahim, do you remember how that?
Yeah, I think we met at there was a Black, I was gonna say hotel, but I think it was called a motel over on, was it Rigdon Road or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
The Carver Motel.
Carver Motel, okay. And we met there for several days going over instructions and how to conduct ourselves, you know, when we got to the library, because they knew there was a very high probability people going to call you the N-word. They may
Yeah.
spit at you and do other things. And you need to be disciplined because again, the whole idea was not to have a confrontation with the police, but to get arrested so we could get to court and let the lawyers argue the things because we knew we were on sound ground because the current law at that time in Columbus was inconsistent with the federal law in Brown versus Board of Education.
All right.
Mm.
Well, panel, thank you, Reverend Allen, Ms. Kirby, Brother Ibrahim, and Bunky McClung. Thank you all for participating as panel members and students. We hope you've taken something away from this. Again, remind your friends to see the exhibit. My name's Rashida Ali. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're just getting started. I'm getting one. I'm waking up.